You just turned 30. You open your banking app before you even get out of bed. $50,000. That's the number everyone throws around like it's the finish line of your 20s. You do the math on your own accounts. You are not close. Not even in the same zip code. So here's the question nobody actually answers honestly. Who really has $50,000 saved by 30? Not who claims it on a podcast. Not who posts it on a finance forum with a screenshot and a flex caption. Who actually has it, in the real world, according to real data. Scroll through enough finance content, and you'll start to believe 50,000 by 30 is the bare minimum. A starter number. Something everyone quietly has except you. That belief didn't come from a government report. It came from an algorithm that rewards the loudest outlier, not the typical household. The answer will surprise you. But first, the reframe. This isn't a story about discipline. It's not about you skipping coffee or canceling a streaming subscription. It's a story about timing, luck, and a financial system that quietly decides who gets to hit that number and who doesn't. Let's build the evidence stack. The Federal Reserve runs something called the Survey of Consumer Finances. Every 3 years, economists survey thousands of American households and measure exactly what they own and what they owe. In 2022, the median net worth for households under 35 was $39,000. Net worth, not cash savings. That number includes home equity, retirement accounts, cars, everything you own minus everything you owe. Cash sitting in a savings account is almost always a fraction of that. Here's the part that should stop you. In 2019, that same median net worth for under 35 households was just $13,900. It nearly tripled in 3 years. That's the largest jump in the survey's 40-year history, not because an entire generation suddenly got disciplined with money. Home prices exploded. Stock portfolios doubled. People who already owned assets before the pandemic watched those assets inflate. People who didn't own anything yet got left exactly where they started. Think about what that timing actually meant. Someone who bought a starter home in 2018 rode one of the sharpest home price increases in decades. Someone who was still renting in 2018, saving toward a down payment that kept moving further away as prices climbed, ended up further behind in 2022 than they were in 2019, even if they saved every single month without missing one. The survey measures the outcome. It doesn't measure the very different games each household was actually playing. Now layer in a second data point. Bankrate publishes an annual emergency savings report every year, and their most recent survey found that 59% of Americans could not cover a $1,000 emergency using savings alone. 27% have zero emergency savings at all, the highest share since 2020. Read that again. Most adults in this country, at any age, cannot produce $1,000 without borrowing it. And you're asking whether you should already have 50,000 by 30. So why does the $50,000 number feel like a personal failure instead of what it actually is, which is a statistical rarity? That brings in the third piece of evidence, and this one is psychological, not economic. In 2011, a researcher named Hal Hirschfield ran a study published in the Journal of Marketing Research. He showed young adults age-progressed images of their own faces, digitally aged into their 60s and 70s, and then asked them how much of a hypothetical paycheck they'd put toward retirement. The people who saw their future face allocated significantly more money to saving than the control group who didn't. Why does that matter here? Because Hirschfield's broader research shows something uncomfortable. Most people's brains treat their future self like a stranger. Not a future version of you, an actual different person. That's why it's so easy to spend the money today, and so hard to picture the version of you who needs it later. The $50,000 goal isn't failing because you're lazy. It's failing because your brain isn't wired to protect a person it doesn't recognize as you yet. Let's walk through what this actually looks like for two people. Person 1 graduates college at 22 with no debt, lands a job with a 401k match, and gets financial help from parents for a down payment at 26. By 30, between home equity and retirement contributions that compounded quietly in the background, they're sitting well above $50,000 in net worth. They didn't necessarily save harder. They started with fewer obstacles, and the market did a lot of the work for them. Person 2 graduates with $40,000 in student loans, takes an entry-level job that barely covers rent in a city where wages haven't kept pace with housing costs, and spends their 20s paying down debt instead of building assets. By 30, their net worth might be zero or negative. Same age, same effort, arguably more effort. Completely different starting line. The Federal Reserve data doesn't hide this. It shows massive variation hiding underneath that median number. And debt load is one of the biggest reasons why. Now picture them at the same dinner table, both 30, both scrolling the same finance video that says, "You should have $50,000 saved by now." Person 1 nods along, quietly proud, crediting their own budgeting app. Person 2 closes the laptop, feeling like they failed at something everyone else figured out. Neither one is seeing the full picture. Person 1 is underestimating how much of that number came from a down payment gift and a housing market that moved in their favor. Person 2 is treating a debt load handed to them at 22 as a personal character flaw instead of a financing decision made before they could legally rent a car. Here's the counterintuitive twist. The people who hit $50,000 by 30 usually aren't the best savers you know. They're often the ones with the fewest financial shocks. No medical bill that wiped out a year of saving, no unexpected job loss, no family emergency that required draining an account. Personal finance content loves to frame wealth building as a character trait. The data says it's just as much about which surprises never happened to you. That doesn't mean effort is irrelevant. It means the framing is broken. Comparing your net worth to a stranger's Instagram caption tells you nothing about your actual trajectory. What matters is the direction your own numbers are moving, not whether you cleared an arbitrary round number by an arbitrary age someone picked, because it sounds satisfying to say out loud. And the round number itself deserves scrutiny. Why 50,000? Not because any economist calculated it as a meaningful threshold. It's a number that sounds impressive when spoken out loud, round enough to fit in a video title, big enough to feel aspirational. Compare that to the actual Federal Reserve figure. $39,000 in net worth, not cash, for the entire under 35 population combined. The standard everyone measures themselves against was never drawn from the data. It was drawn from what sounds good in a thumbnail. Now bring this back to your life today. If you're nowhere near $50,000 right now, you are, statistically, in the majority, not the exception. If you already know your net worth is negative because of student loans, you are describing millions of people the Federal Reserve counted in the same survey. The shame that number carries was never earned. It was manufactured by comparison. What actually moves the needle isn't chasing someone else's checkpoint. It's tracking your own net worth every few months, even when the number is small or negative, because Hirschfield's research suggests the simple act of watching your future self take shape changes how you treat your money today. It's understanding that a 401k match is free money compounding in the background, whether or not you feel rich yet. It's knowing that debt paid down is net worth built, even though it doesn't feel like saving. It also means building a buffer before you build a portfolio. Remember that 59% of Americans couldn't cover a $1,000 emergency from savings. That single fact predicts more about someone's financial trajectory than their age ever will. A person with $3,000 in an emergency fund and zero investments is, in practice, more financially stable than a person with a growing portfolio and no cushion, because one unplanned expense can force that second person to sell investments at the worst possible moment just to cover rent. Stability isn't glamorous enough to make a viral thumbnail, but it's what actually keeps a small net worth moving upward instead of getting wiped out and starting over. So you open that banking app again. The number still isn't 50,000, but now you know what that number actually represents. Not a verdict on your worth as a person. Not proof you're behind everyone your age. Just one household snapshot from a Federal Reserve survey, inflated by a housing and stock boom most people didn't control. Sitting on top of a mountain of debt most people didn't choose either. You check your bank account again. The number is still lower than you expected. But this time, you know exactly why. And you know it was never really about you.